I have literally, in the last 2 minutes, finished watching, wait for it, Midsommar, borrowed from my local library. Support your local library. It's not good. I'd seen the director's previous film, Hereditary, and I really wasn't impressed by it. It seemed to be just a bunch of shock tactics and um, stylish atmosphere allied to a very thin, pointless story. And Midsommar is just everything that I didn't like about the previous film, but worse. Um, it's effectively a rip-off of The Wicker Man, and The Wicker Man casts a very long shadow in terms of its story of the outsider coming to a community that practices an unusual religious faith and ultimately becoming a victim of that community. But there's very little in Midsommar that's actually different or original. There's a lot of Eli Roth's Hostel thrown in as well, of the ugly Americans going to the foreign country, because in this a group of American students, anthropology students, and the girlfriend of one of them, whose family died in a horrific murder-suicide earlier that year, travel to a Swedish commune as they celebrate their midsummer ceremonies. But it turns out that it's a cult, and there's suicide rituals, and it's human sacrifices, and it's all just a bit too unoriginal, uninteresting, thin to the point of emaciation, and it's just repeating material from The Wicker Man. Studying this culture in the way that The Wicker Man is a story about old and new religions in conflict, but it has none of the intelligence of The Wicker Man. In particular, the strength of The Wicker Man, and I'm talking about it a lot, but it's basically, this is a remake of The Wicker Man. The important thing is that the police officer who goes to the island to investigate isn't coming from another country. He's Scottish, and he's going to a Scottish island. In this film, it's Americans going to Sweden, just as in Hostel, it's Americans going to Slovakia. And there's a sense that the film's saying, don't go to foreign countries, it's not safe there. It's Sweden. It's fine. They're not even going to the outer wilds of the country. So that really annoyed me. And the acting is adequate. The characters are thinly sketched, and for the most part, the Americans are either sexist, xenophobic morons, or the main character, the girlfriend of one of the anthropologists, and he's trying to get rid of her, but her family died earlier in the year. She is just a victim all the way through, until she's able to get revenge as the cult rallies around her and becomes a surrogate family for her. That's really the only innovation the film has, but it's overshadowed by the family dying in a murder-suicide, which doesn't really add anything. They could have died in a car crash and it would have made just as much sense, but instead it's a gruesome murder-suicide for no real reason. In the same way that Hereditary involves one character being beheaded in a car accident just because it's a shock tactic, just because it's gruesome, because that's what Ari Aster specialises in, shock tactics, because there's no substance to either of his movies. It's shocks and atmosphere and nothing else. There's no substance to his films. And I've talked for longer than I think he thought through the elements of Midsommar. He saw it as a film about a breakup, but it's just not interesting enough because the boyfriend in the breakup is such a terrible human being. I'm wondering why they went out in the first place. The characters are thoroughly dislikable. The setting is a cliche and completely unoriginal. There are parts that are laugh out loud funny, and I'm fairly sure aren't supposed to be funny, even though Aster has described it as a dark comedy, but the bits that I think he thinks are funny are not funny. It's just a complete waste of time. And to top all that off, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. 2 hours and 20 minutes of saying and doing very little. There's a director's cut that's 3 hours. Think about that. Think about how horror movies work, that they play on the more superficial emotions, which is fine, but it's a mistake to try and string that out for more than 2 hours, which is why you'll see very few horror films, and few comedies for that matter, over 2 hours, because comedies tend to work in the same way. They play on more superficial feelings of gaining an immediate response from the audience. You won't see many thrillers that long either, because they try to keep you in a state of tension and suspense. Dramas, which are aiming to get a more deeper emotional engagement, can run for longer, because you're not being kept in this superficial level of emotional engagement. It has more depth to it. So for a horror movie to be 2 hours 20 minutes long, it's exhausting. But it would be if it actually worked, if it was scary, if it made any sense, because it's full of holes and there's a lot that doesn't make any sense at all. It's a complete mess of a film. I'm done with Aster. I'm not going to watch any more of his films because he clearly doesn't have the goods to back up his reputation. And Midsommar is a bizarre and massively unoriginal misfire.